Going on, guys? Sensible Prep Live. We're going to be talking about some really fun stuff today. and we really appreciate you guys showing up. And of course, this video will be live, even though it's live now. It will be part of the Prepper School playlist. Robbie Wheaton is in Guatemala, and he's on a mission trip right now. So he couldn't be with us, but I'm sure that he is experiencing a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I have Sarah Mack over on the computer, and she will be monitoring for questions. You can ask them at any time, and we'll take a break. And we always love to get your questions. There's always a lot of good, thought-provoking questions that are typically shown. So also, we want to thank Exotac for sponsoring today's episode. You get a 20% off all of their fire starters. They make beautiful fire starters down in Winder, Georgia. And you get 20% off using Sootch 20 with the link down below in the description. They're by far my favorites, just very high quality. So today we're going to talk about SHTF. It's coming. And, you know, a little bit of that can be a little bit resounding. And honestly, guys, I've seen it so many times. A lot of times it's clickbait. You got 48 hours before this happens. You got to do this before this happens. You know, this is it. This is the end, you know, and all that. And over the years, I've always said that you need to be prepared for a number of different situations, but being basically prepared covers a lot of bases. One thing we're going to do a little different today. There are a lot of threats. I mean, there's EMP, there's civil war, there's global war, there's all kind of different things that can happen. The grid goes down for whatever reason. Things can happen. Natural disasters are definitely part of a localized SHTF situation. Florida seems to get their share of the Gulf Coast. But we're going to talk today about some things that are going on that I've watched for a number of years. I read a book. It's called The Parable of a Sower. It was written back in about 1990s, sometime in the 90s. And Octavia Butler, she is a Black author that does science fiction. And I found this on a book list. As I was reading this book, and I highly recommend the book, there's a little bit of some mystic stuff that she goes into that I don't really agree with. But as far as the material and what she puts out and lays out a scenario, I thought this is almost like prophecy. I read a lot of different books, and there's a lot of different threats. But today we're going to talk about something that I am seeing unfolding right before our eyes. And I think it's important for you to see the signs, but also to be able to prepare for those things. And that's what this is about. It is sensible survival. It's not doomsday. We're going to all die of a zombie apocalypse. And so, there's solutions, or at least ideas to help lead you to solutions, because that's my mission. That's what it's all about. The better my neighbor's prepared, the better I'm prepared. And so that is my big thing. So first off, we're going to talk about an economic meltdown. Now, one of the things in all through history, any kind of situation that's happened, it doesn't happen typically overnight. It's a buildup. It takes years. The American Civil War, it took years and years. The American Revolution, it took years and years. A lot of things had to happen and to line up before actual shots were fired, even though it was heading that direction. And so it's just like this, guys. If you're a prepper and you're like, I'm prepping, and you're watching the news and they're throwing out this sensation, that's one of the dangers of preppers that get on YouTube and they just, man, this is it. This is it. When I started this channel back, it was 2010. I had the Sootch channel. It's my gun channel. It's 2008. When I started it, there were already people saying, if you haven't stocked up, if you're not ready, it's too late. And that was 14 years ago, 12 years ago for prepper. Guys, it's not too late, but it is time to kind of really take notice. So first off is the economy. We're really dealing with some economy issues and they're not being remedied. They're being actually increased. I think it was the Nicaraguan president just recently said the U.S. has been so great for so long and it's so powerful. It's crazy to see how it's in free fall right now, that it's not internal. And so, one of the big things is there is a global initiative for a lot of the things that we're looking at. And it's really causing some disruptions in the economies. It's causing disruptions with supply chains, with things that you typically have relied on. And we're seeing it. So first off, the one thing we're seeing with the economy is inflation. And if you've gone out to dinner lately, or you've even gone to lunch, it's getting more and more expensive. We had a local place here in town that had hamburgers, cheeseburger special for $5.99, and it's now at $8.99. And it took just a year and a half or two for it to jump up. And that is inflation. Your dollar becomes less and worth less and less. The other thing that we're seeing is mass immigration. Now, when I talk about mass immigration, of course, the first thing we think about is the border. And that is a problem. But another issue, and especially for us here in South Carolina, is we're having mass immigration from other states, which really puts a strain on the infrastructure, puts a strain on the road system and traffic. It puts a strain on the school systems. It puts a strain on our power grid. And so we're really seeing a lot of issues that are coming out of that. Now, not all of them are bad. There's a lot of good people that have moved down here, a lot of friends that have moved down here. So it's not that, but it is putting a massive strain. And overall, with the immigrants coming over the borders, which are not just Latino, there's a lot of different nationalities that are now seeing that opportunity and they're taking it. And so we're getting just inundated with just a mass amount of people. And yet we're not ready to take on that amount of people. And if you don't believe it, watch New York and the panic that's going there, or in Chicago, where they're saying we don't have enough room. They've got to take over abandoned buildings, and they're doing all this stuff just to house these people. Do I blame these people for coming? No. There's bad conditions where they're from, but there needs to be a proper way to do it. And so we're getting just covered up. And this puts a massive strain on local governments, national governments, all governments. And so that's definitely one thing with the economy and with this mass immigration of whatever it is definitely causing some situations. And it's just part of the problem. Also, we're seeing when we see inflation and we're seeing prices go up, there are less goods being bought. Layoffs happen. People lose their jobs. Now, in an economic SHTF, and this is really what we're going to kind of talk about today. First off is you lose your job. There's less and less jobs. There's more and more people there to take jobs. Now, theoretically, with our current system in the past, the more people that are in an area, the more opportunity there is. So a business is open, apartment complexes go up, and people have more opportunity to thrive because there are more people that are in need. But when you start with government regulations on, trucking and supply chain and those kind of things, to where you just can't start a business because you can't get the goods and services you need. And so it has to be a balance. It's kind of like driving a straight shift. You got to put in the clutch and let the clutch out as you're putting in a little bit of gas. If you just let the clutch off, then the car jerks and stops. And it's kind of what we're doing right now. We've just pulled the clutch out. We're not putting on the gas. We need to have that balance. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are going on that are hindering the pushing of the gas. And one big one is a lot of digging, drilling, a lot of mines. In fact, I think this past week there was a 50-year ban on mining in certain areas. Those are raw materials that we need. Those are things that we need to sustain our current economy. It's things we need. Fuel. We've definitely backed off of, whether it's pipelines coming in, whether it's drilling, whether it's offshore drilling, and filling those needs for just here in the U.S. We're not able to meet those needs. Now, you know what? I'm big on technology, and yes, let's look at doing some different alternative methods, and let's move into the future. But we have to do it in a slow, methodical way. It needs to be a natural progression, not forced by regulations and seizures and closures and stopping to bring about something that's really hasn't reached its peak. We have a local station up here that has electrical hookups for cars. And you can go by there at any time and there'll be a bunch of electric cars. The Teslas usually are the ones you see. There's a lot of them sitting there. And you know what? Great. You want to buy a Tesla, you want to, enjoy it. Just don't go down to a hurricane where it's going to flood and the thing will blow up on you. But this technology, whatever, is something that's moving, but let's let it do it naturally. And one of the problems, especially toward our economy, is that we're starting to limit gasoline, fossil fuel type cars, gas stoves, propane, those kind of things. And there are a lot of restrictions that are being placed more and more. Guys, just to be honest, we're not ready for electric cars on a mass scale because we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the way to power those cars. It puts a massive strain on our power grid. And so doing that, it just causes a lot of issues. Now, there are a lot of other things like lithium batteries and how they're mined and all the damage they do to the earth. And that's a whole nother subject, because what we have to be concerned about right now is how it affects us directly. Yes, it affects a lot of people, but here it's affecting us directly. So our power grid, our means to travel from one area to another is being limited. And that is going to cause issues with our economy. Another thing is once you're jobless, once you're unemployed, you can't pay your bills. I highly recommend getting out of debt. Get yourself out of debt. You're paying a lot of money in interest. Get your house paid off as fast as you can if you own a home. Get your cars paid off. Get your monthly bills down. So if you do lose your job, you're able to at least maybe work a lesser job, but you have less bills. And so you're able to perform and to go. And guys, honestly, one thing I've said about long-term food is if you buy up food and you store it, if you do have you're unemployed for 3 months, you're able to eat that food, and that makes it cost less at the grocery store, which you can use that toward your utilities and your other bills. So it's just a very practical solution as well. But one of the things about jobless is then you go into possible homelessness. The number of homeless people in this country have been multiplied. And while a lot of them are just people that don't care, don't want to work, they're mentally ill, they have drug addictions, they have alcohol problems, but there are more and more people that are just being left out because they just can't afford new homes. And we know, and we've seen it, home prices have gone through the roof. And the more people, like in our area, our real estate market is crazy, because if you've got a house for sale, people are coming in and paying more than your asking price because they're in competition with others. One thing that BlackRock, Vanguard, that huge conglomeration, that's huge investment firms, they are now actively buying private residences. They're buying subdivisions. They're buying homes, and they're only rentable. They're not for sale. And so we're finding ourselves more and more to not own the home, but to have to rent the home. Apartment prices are through the roof. This affects your bottom dollar. Young couple we're good friends with, and I've mentioned this before. They have a $1,500 a month rent payment. They've been notified that that's going up to $2,500. And so this is a young couple that's just getting out. In fact, they just had a baby. And to make $2,500 a month just for rent is a massive strain on your finances. And so we're seeing that this is causing more and more issues. Guys, the more the food prices go up, the more all of the basic necessities that we have are going up. It means we have less buying power. Now, one thing that I've been big about for years is having cash on hand. But when inflation comes around, it makes that dollar worth less and less. That's why I'm a huge proponent of precious metals. Get your precious metals, silver, gold. Now, guys, I know there are going to be comments saying, well, I've got my precious metals. It's brass, steel and copper. And I have plenty of that. But that is not going to pay my house payment. That's not going to pay my car payment or my utility bill. And so having gold and silver put back, it protects your wealth. And right now it's staying at a very low, you're staying at a fairly decent level. It's not really been jumping up too much. And now is a great time to buy it. One thing that is happening right now is China and the central bank are buying a lot of gold and silver, and they're able to back up their currency. Should be the same on our level. The more assets you have, the more opportunities you have. And so having gold and silver, guys, it's crazy not to. And if you're looking for somebody, Scottsdale Mint is one of the best. They're out of Arizona, but they mint coins. They mint the national coins for over 20 countries. And I've known those guys for years. So if you're looking to get into some bullion or some coins, they're awesome guys. But I highly recommend at least getting yourself in a decent position with that. Now, drug abuse and crime. Of course, one thing that's big is that whenever you have any kind of economic meltdown or you have an economic slide, crime rises because people become desperate and there's less services. We've seen with the police departments, and the defund the police movement, which is really whether it's actually impacted your area directly, it's impacted the country as a whole. So there's less laws that are protecting retail stores. You can steal up to $1,000 without getting a felony. And so people are running around. They're not even being charged for that. And it's running companies and businesses out of business. The cities are going to get hit first. And then it's going to spill out into the rural areas or the suburban areas because these people are having to look for different different opportunities for what they're doing. And so that's one of the things, and I've said this for years, in Argentina back in 2001, when they had their economic meltdown, he said there wasn't a massive just SHTF. He goes, it just was a slide with the economy. And he said, and crime went up proportionately. And so, that's one of the problems is that crime is going to increase. Now, what happens with crime? Not only is it can be violent, but even if it isn't, they're taking things that you've worked really hard for, and so you're going to be left, and a lot of times without anything. And so, as the economy happens and it starts to slide down, things start to happen in place. I really feel like the government is going to stay intact. I don't think that all of a sudden, a lot of people just feel like that once SHTF happens, that it's just lawless and everything's going nuts and there's no authority. Let me say one thing. There's this saying. It says man has to be controlled. It's either self-control or it's force. It's one or the other. And when chaos happens, people are going to demand for control to be taken. And so government, though, in place, but government lower on funds, lower on services, lower on police, fire, medical. There could be an increase in their needs. So that actually adds to, and then lower budgets, which cause more issues. One thing I don't understand with a lot of these cities, especially city councils and mayors that are pushing really a lot of retailers out because they're not really being tough on crime, is that they're losing their tax base. And a lot of people that live there are having to move out because a lot of the services and the crime and everything else is becoming a real problem. And we've seen it here. A lot of people from cities are moving here. So what's happening is they have less and less as far as taxable income coming in to those cities to help manage all this. And to me, that is the craziest thing. It doesn't make any sense unless there is an agenda to do that. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. I think there's definitely a push, a global initiative to push a lot of these things. With the green energy initiative, that's definitely something, that's putting a strain on our economy. and has put a strain on economies around the world. And so it gives us less for what? And we're having to deal with the outcome. Okay, so police intact, fire department intact, medical services intact. The problem is a lot of times, and it was one of the scenarios in this book was that if you had the police come out, you had to pay them. It became a service. And if the fire department came out to put out a fire, you have to pay them because they just don't have the funds. And one thing I do want to mention right here before we get into and we're going to go to some questions here in just a second. So I'm going to give Sarah Mack a warning. But one of the things that that happens is that as utilities, having utilities, they become more expensive. Getting water becomes more expensive. Having the police come out gets more expensive. And we pay for that through our taxes. But then on top of that, we're having to pay more. But one of the big things that is a definitely a wild card, and I really feel like this is more in line with what could happen even with this, is that when there are problems happening, a lot of times people do come together. People in communities, they help. My daughter witnessed a really horrific wreck the other day where a car actually flipped in an intersection. 10 people jumped out of their cars and ran toward the car to help. So don't discount, the benevolence of people. For me, if I see something, I'm going to help someone. There's a lot of people that do. There's a lot of people, and there's a growing number of people that won't. But you watch a flood. When a flood happens in an area, a tornado happens, earthquakes happen, people come in, get together, and they help. And so there is an element of that. But and we're going to look at that in a minute, but one of the big things, and I've always said this, guys, is you need to have a group of people that are working together. Whether it's a prepper group, whether it's getting your neighbors involved, have a cookout, invite your neighbors over, get to know your neighbors. One of the things that's really bad about our area is that people get into subdivisions or apartments, they get stuck in there and they don't reach out, and you don't even know the person that lives across the street from you. You can wave at them as you're leaving and you get familiar, but you don't even know them. And so getting to know people is a huge benefit, especially as the economy starts to wind down and things start to happen. And you're able to count on those people by building relationships with them. And that is a huge plus. Now, let's go to a few questions.
ENC Gunny says, what advice can you give for trying to keep your younger kids from telling everyone about your preps and or prepping in general?
That's a tough one. And it's one that, you just set them down and say, talking about this puts us in some danger, because the more people that know, because obviously if you're telling people, that is where they want to come if something happens. And then you're going to find yourself either they'll take it by force or they're going to beg and demand it or want it. And so, sitting your kids down and just talking to them about it, to me is the biggest thing. I mean, me being a public figure with prepping, we have a lot of friends that live all over, and a lot of them have said over the years, well, I know where I'm going. I'm like, no, not unless you bring food with you, because we have to take care of our community. When I say our community, again, it's the people around you. But yeah, I would sit down and try to explain to them, especially those that are able to, really understand. It's like I told my son years ago. He asked me, he goes, why do we have all this food? And we're doing all this stuff. And I said, it just keeps me from being tempted to run out and take from others if you're starving. I said, so that way, I've taken care of that temptation. But you need to make sure they understand that they need to be quiet about it. It's a security risk.
Tammy Lee asks, what was that book again?
It was the Parable of a Sower, or A Parable of a Sower. It's by Octavia Butler. It was written years ago. It really is excellent, and we're going to actually talk about a few things that I got out of that book. But one of the things that happened in these neighborhoods is it just slowly started happening. So they started building a wall around their community. They had a neighborhood, and the neighborhood got together because crime was so bad. The homeless are out there, the junkies, the people that just people out there that didn't have, a way to be able to eat. And so they would come in and steal and steal and steal and kill a lot of times. They just do whatever. And so they built this wall. It's almost like a tribal kind of environment where they have their tribe. The problem is when they had to go to work, which a few of them didn't even work. They couldn't work because they had no jobs. And so they would have to get a group to take somebody to work, and then they'd come back. And then when the person got off work, they'd take a group and pick them up and come back. And these walled areas were all over the city. The scenario was in Los Angeles, of all places. But very good. I will warn you, though, there is some stuff about her philosophy on God that was a little bit strange. Not crazy, but just a little bit strange. But otherwise, the content of the book is very well written, and it's worth reading.
JD Prepping Area says, do you believe we are headed towards 15-minute cities?
Yes. I mean, well, that's the plan. That's the plan. Because, the thing is, their big thing is, you own nothing and you're happy. They want to take away, all of our incentives, all of our wealth, all of our assets. And then we're in these cities to where instead of driving to places, we can just walk. You can walk to your store. New York City is a perfect example. Wherever you want to go, neighborhoods are, New York City's huge, but it's got small little boroughs and places, little communities. And, I haven't been to New York in a few years, but I used to go to New York a lot. And it was really cool because there are communities that are there. So they would go to eat, they'd go to, get their groceries. They would, have all these different places. And that's really what they're trying to shoot for. And the problem is they have control over everything. They even limit the amount of travel that you can do. And they say you can only limit because this in the name of green energy and the carbon footprint and all this BS to me that we're seeing. And they're using that as a tactic to be able to control us.
Ken Garrett asks, Sootch, have you had any dealings with and experience with Olight knives?
Knives, yes, I have, and they're great little knives. They're made in China. They're not made by Olight. I think they're made by Kaiser Knives. Which here's the thing, guys. It's like Japan. Japan, when they first started doing a lot of products and everything, they were terrible. They're crappy, and now Japan has become synonymous with quality. I mean, they make some really incredible products. But the prices have gone way up. Same thing with China. When at first I wouldn't even buy a tool. I wouldn't buy a knife. I wouldn't buy anything like that. But then their quality started going up, and they really competed quality-wise with other products. And typically the prices are less. Good or bad, I understand. But the computer you're looking at right now, or the phone you're watching, is made in China. The camera that's showing this is made in China. But I found that knives are excellent utility knives. I like them. The prices are pretty reasonable. They're made of good quality steel. They hold up well. So yes, I think that they're a great option. Do I have zero tolerance knives and Microtech and all? Yes, I have some very nice, expensive American made knives. Love them. But for me, a lot of times I'll stick an knife in my pocket, and it's a great knife to carry around. I'm not worried about it, and they're good quality. So yes, I think they're good stuff.
John Wick asks,
Hey,
what
John.
if U.S. government would ban gold ownership as it has done in the past? Any recommendations on storing precious metals?
Well, there's a number of reasons why we want to hide our precious metals, obviously from theft. One of the things that, silver is a great option as well. The problem with silver is to match the gold per weight is something different per value. I try to do both. I have gold that I put back, but I also have quite a bit of silver, and they don't seem to be after the silver as much. Of course, that was currency, but in the end, I think that will be their goal. But I think over the next few years, I don't think we need to worry about it. But obviously, gold and silver are God's currency. It's something that we have been using as a medium of exchange since man discovered it, and it will continue to be. if we have black markets open up or local markets, if the economy starts to go and people start meeting in markets like they do in a lot of third world countries. And that gold and silver are going to be really worth a lot when our cash is going down to be valueless. So I definitely am a huge, I don't think that there's anything. I think right now with our Congress and the leadership, I don't think they're going to allow that for a while, but it could happen.
Jake Harris's question: where to find a MAG? Not start one, to join one.
It's tough. Now here in South Carolina, they where I live, there's the Upstate Prepper Group, and they get on Facebook, and then they have events, and they get together and they do stuff, and that's a great way to get on Facebook. And I really didn't know about the one here until a friend of mine that is actually a member told me about it, and he said, "Hey, it's a great time." And that way you can meet in a place, an event, and then you get to know people, and then you can decide if you want to be a part of them. And two, it keeps some of your, you're not out there showing people what you have, inviting them to your house, all that kind of stuff. You can just kind of get together and gain some ideas, meet some people, and then build a group out of that. That's probably at this point right now one of the best ways to do it. Obviously, a lot of times gun shops, guys are talking and things, and sometimes because they're concerned possibly. And so, you might be able to make some relationships there. Church is also a good place if you are a local community that you're doing a lot with. But to me, if you have a Facebook area, local Facebook page that is a prepper oriented group, and you want to be careful not to get involved in a group that's big, has big egos, because that is one of the biggest problems, and it causes a lot of division. But I think that's one of the best ways to do it.
Gary Hernandez, Self-Defense and Urban Survival,
Hey,
says,
Gary.
hello, my question: have you guys ever considered doing a live seminar with people on a weekend event for prepping and survival? Thanks, Gary.
Well, I used to do a lot of those with Carolina Readiness. Well, we used to have our own prepper. We had the Sensible Survival Prepper Group, Prepper Convention, or whatever, and we'd have 500 or 600 people show up, and we had a good place that we could do it. And we had Scott Hunt from Engineer 775, who was the Doomsday Preppers guy who analyzed all the prepping things. Southern Prepper One. A lot of guys in this area, and we would have a huge amount of people. And then we lost the place that we had, and then Carolina Readiness started doing it. So we started going to them. There's a prepper camp that's local. And in fact, I was on the same stage with William Forestian, who wrote 1 Second After, on one of the prepper conventions or prepper meetups that we went to. But unfortunately for me, I don't have enough time with the Sootch channel, because it's twice the size of my Sensible Prepper channel. So a lot of times I get kind of behind, but it is a possibility. We really enjoyed it. We really had a great time at those conferences. So, but there typically are conferences that pop up here and there. If you just kind of watch, I wish I could give you some references, but I don't know. Okay, let's go. We're going to come back to some questions, but let's continue on. One of the things too is, a lot of times people get really heavy into communications, which I think you should. I think you should have some alternate ways to communicate. But with this economy and with the government still intact, I still see that we'll have cell service. We could possibly still have TV, radio. All those things are still going. That is a good possibility. Now, again, worst case scenario, you may have to get connections. You may have to have communications. Also, cell service fees could be through the roof. Being able to get TV and radio, there may be cost associated with it. So, but I feel like that if the government stays intact, even though they're a little bit more limited to their scope, communications would stay in place as well. And so one of those things, that's kind of subjective. Is that mine? Yeah, it's mine. Okay. Fuel shortages. And listen, guys, we are going to see fuel shortages because there is a massive push toward green energy that we are not ready for. We are not ready for all this bull hockey. I mean, yes, again, for technology. Think we ought to be working toward it. Think we ought to be doing some things. I mean, that's the way it is for innovation and to go into the future. But at this point right now, fossil fuels, they're very vital to our economy. And there is an attack from the administration against fossil fuels, an outright war going on. And it's happening also on the state level in a lot of places. So we're looking at prices of fuel going through the roof. What they really want to do is price it out to where it's so expensive for you to buy gas that you switch to these other alternative methods. The problem is, guys, is for me to travel. We just went to Virginia, went to the OBI or the Olight Fan Day, and I drove up there. It was 7.5 hours. I would have at least had to have stopped at least once, maybe twice, which would have added 20, 30, 40 minutes to my trip each way, here and there, finding the right place to hook up to. And the problem is the more cars that get online with electric, that are basic electric cars, the more strain it's going to put, again, on the power grid. So you may be, I've got a Tesla. I love it. It's really cool. I like to drive it around town. It saves me money. Great. And I have no problem with that. But if I want to take a trip, or if I want to have more independence, I can load up my Jeep and put a couple of extra gas cans on it, and I can drive to Timbuktu, and I don't have to worry about, finding an electrical power station where I can charge my vehicle. But it's also in a lot of other areas. And so fossil fuels, gasoline, all the different things that oil, diesel fuels, all that stuff, they keep us running. And with the attack on these fossil fuels, it's really going to cause us a lot of problems in our economy. So it's just one of the things to watch for. And also, there's a big push against food production. And that's one thing we're seeing all across the world. And we're seeing big companies and very wealthy people buying up huge tracts of farmland. What are they doing with it? Are they going to continue? Bill Gates owns thousands of acres, thousands, maybe 1 million acres. I don't know. It's a lot of acreage of farmland. With his philosophy on what we should be doing with our food, I'm telling you, he is not growing things that we want to eat. And so, food shortages, just like in Venezuela. Venezuela was a very big food producer, big oil producer. They were becoming their middle class was really growing. Typically, it's the government that comes in, just like with green energy and just like with some of these other initiatives, that come in and put restrictions and mandates, and they do things that cause more problems than they solve. And we're seeing that more and more. That's one of the problems, I think, is it can be stopped. It can be stopped. But are we going to be able to get somebody in there to stop it and to turn it around? Yes, invest in solar, invest in electrical power, invest in those things. I love my cordless drill. I love my flashlights with the lithium ion battery in it. But, don't take away all my AA batteries for the lights that I have set back in case I can't get them. So anyway, fuel, green energy shortage, the green energy initiatives and the global initiatives are really at war with our energy. And so that's one thing that can cause a lot of problems. One thing, though, and I was talking about this book, but one of the things, and I really hadn't thought about it this way, but what in this book, with the economy going down, people couldn't afford to eat. They didn't have jobs. There were few people that had jobs, and they were having to take care of the entire family. Inflation had really wreaked havoc with people, and they were really having to make a lot of money to be able to pay for goods and services. So what happened was companies, wealthy people would come in, and they would set up or build a community or would purchase this community. And they would offer, they would give security. They would have a law enforcement, their own personal company security. They would watch everything. They would have gardens and different tasks for people to do. And they would pay them in company credits. And so when they needed anything like food, they would go to the company store. And the only thing they could use were the company credits, which they couldn't use anywhere else. And the prices were high. And they could also live there if they worked. And so working there, living there, being able to eat, being able to live, but having no extra money. That was all they were doing. They were just working to live. And these big conglomerates were coming in and buying up these areas. And so that is something that just, it was funny because when I read it, I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense for people to, they take people that are desperate and they almost enslave them. It's pretty much what they're doing, because all they're doing is working for food and working for a place to live. That's no different than most slave places, or most places in the world that have slavery that's still intact. FEMA, that's been one thing about the FEMA camps. And over the years, like, we haven't really heard a lot about that lately, but there was a lot of talk about FEMA camps moving in, setting up camps, people going there because they didn't have food, they didn't have shelter. So they go there so they can at least get that and live. But then where are you going from there? And so that's one of the reasons why you want to stay as independent as you can. And that's really the whole thing about this. Guys, if you're depending on the authorities, they're going to let you down. And a lot of times what's good for all is more important than what's good for each of us. And this country was based on individual rights. And that's what made America so great. When we give up our individual rights for the collective rights, then we find ourselves in a big mess. And we lose our freedom, we lose our liberty. Same thing with this. Another thing that to consider, which is right on the heels of this, are warlords or people coming in. Power is going to be a power vacuum. So the people are going to want to come in and get control of areas. And so that is another thing to consider in any SHTF situation. A lot of times people talk about, well, I'm going to build me a cabin up here in the woods. Nobody's going to be able to find me. I'm going to tell you what, guys. I have a buddy of mine just recently. He lives way up in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And it's very difficult to get to his place. And there's no easy way to do it. And it's even on the top of a mountain. So even the areas around it are difficult to traverse. Going up the road is about the only way to get a vehicle up there. He gets a notice that somebody's on his property. And so he was sitting at a restaurant eating. So he jumps in his car. He goes up there. And sure enough, there's an old car sitting on the side of the road real near his house. He gets up there. He ends up, there were 3 men up there, and they were drug dealers or drug addicts, and they were looking for stuff. And so the police got there after we called him. But he was in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to tell you guys, especially with the drug epidemics and the people that are on these drugs, they are desperate, and they are everywhere. They are everywhere. So if you feel like, I'm going to go and I'm going to have this bug out location, you are not immune to that kind of threat. We could think we are. We want to be. I've been in tons of small towns, and they have a lot of problems with it. And these people are looking for things, and they are on a desperate search. And here you are with you and just your family. To me, one of the most important things, and I really want you to really grasp this, is not that lone wolf survival. It is having a community, having a group together. Was one of the things in this book that was talking about this community joined together, and they had their own security. They did their own thing there. They had vegetable gardens. They had fruit trees. They were able to do stuff right there in their community. And unfortunately, I don't want to give away the book, but it was compromised. It'll even say that at the beginning, but it was compromised by homeless druggies that were looking for money or looking just for food and to steal things. And that was one of the big things that happened. Crime increases when the economy goes down. It's just like, it just parallels. So it's just one of those things. So to me, these different subjects we've just been talking about, it's more probable that is the way things are going to go in a slow down turn than for an EMP, for a zombie apocalypse, for whatever kind of scenario you want to lay in there, a nuclear strike. Those things are possible. But to me, the economy collapsing and then people being more and more desperate is definitely more probable. And so it's one of those things that you need to protect yourself as much as possible. So what are the steps to protect yourself? Number one is to get to know your neighbors, get to know people around you, build relationships. You want them to have a sense of trust. And then when somebody comes in from the outside, you have this unity with your people. When it's a prepper group, you can join together, you can work on things, you can help each other. That's also just a great way to do it. Your local church is a great way to be a part of, or some kind of community assembly or something that you may be a part of. Get together with those people and build relationships with them. They may not be of the same mindset at this point, but that could change. And the more things happen, the more they want to survive just like everybody else. And then, of course, considering, you know, your security around your place, considering things that could happen. And a big one, again, guys, is make sure that you have your cash set aside, but more importantly, make sure that you have some gold and silver put back, get your bills paid, lessen your credit, and get yourself in good shape. Yes, you still have to pay property tax, so you never really own your place. But it costs a lot less for me to come up with my property tax than it does a monthly mortgage. So, or car payment or cable bills and all the other things that that we end up spending. Cell phones absolutely ridiculous. I mean, what we pay for our family, I used to rent a house for when I was a kid, when I was in my 20s. So, it's crazy how things have changed. And again, it is incremental. So let's go to some questions. We'll throw Sarah Mack under the bus.
King's Outdoors does ask, if the value of precious metals is valued by currency, what happens when the digital currency is all that's accepted?
Well, here's the thing, and that's coming. I mean, it may not come in our lifetime, but it's coming. I think it will come in our lifetime, which is the complete loss of freedom. But one of the things, there will be underground markets. There will be black markets. There will be people trading and doing. There's a big flea market right on down below our house. It's huge, and people are down there trading and dealing. They're not taking credit cards. They're just spending cash and making trades and deals all the time. And that may come under scrutiny by the government, because the problem is government in itself wants more and more control. It's just, they know better. They want to do better. I'm not anti-government. I think a good government that is for the people, that's small, is hugely beneficial, and we need it. But I think that the more people get power, the more they want to control things. It's for our good, but it's not for our good most of the time. It's usually for their good. One thing about it, too, with political issues is that traditionally, and there's always been corrupt politicians, but traditionally politicians were working to make things better for Americans, better for people in these, that there were constituents. Now it seems like that they're more out to who can pay them the most, what corporate entity can pay them and give them the most money for them to do and vote for however they want to vote, which is not always good for us. In fact, it's very rarely good for us.
HD Pristine Care asks, Sootch, I have a very hard time accepting your concept of survival communities. I just don't know if I could trust anyone outside my wife and kids.
Yeah, I understand that. But I can't stay up 24/7 to put security out. It's either I'm keeping an eye on things, or your wife is keeping an eye on things, and you've got to have some sleep. And in a grid down situation or an SHTF situation like we're talking about, it's economy goes down, crime goes up. Go to South Africa. And I have a buddy of mine that lived in South Africa for a number of years. They live in walled houses. Their houses are walled. Get into Central America, their houses are walled. But when the mobs come, there's nothing to save them. And, there are people out there that, and I've had this before, I can survive out there and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, maybe you, but not 99% of the population. The old survivalist mindset has kind of gone out of favor because a lot of people see it. And for FOWL, you need to read, what you need to do is read the Modern Survival Guide for the Coming Economic Collapse, which was done by FOWL in Argentina. It was actual events that happened in Argentina. And a lot of my philosophies are based on that, because Argentina was a first world country. They were doing really well. FOWL says, alone, you will not make it. He goes, you have to have a group. And he said he lived in Buenos Aires, and they had a block, and the people joined together and they protected their property and kept people away. And so So that's fine. We'll have to agree to disagree, because I really feel like that without a group, you're really going to be vulnerable, very vulnerable.
Master Blaster asks, is it safer living closer to U.S. military bases during SHTF?
It's according to what it's according to what you want to endure. The problem is military bases typically are a target for rogue nations, or even for EMPs, or for even a nuclear attack. For me personally, I really wouldn't want to be near a military base. Could there be more supplies that you could get a hold of? Maybe the military base would be more out to have supplies for emergencies, possibly. So it's according to the situation, I think, would be the main thing. The National Guard, they head out when they have a big hurricane, and they take food and different things, and they help people. Again, guys, one thing about it is don't feel like that everyone is going to just collapse into a zombie if things go south. They're still good people. I'll tell you, if things go south and everything goes nuts, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to still have compassion for people. I'm still going to care about people. Number one, I'm a Christian, so it's part of who I am. But caring for others, so there could be a real joining together of people, and especially in a community situation.
Keelan asks, question, is canned water such as Liquid Death a good option for long-term water storage?
Well, they're sealed, and they're out of the sunlight. Typically, they're in Mylar bags or something. For short term, maybe short term, but personally, I would look at alternative methods to harvest water, whether it's with a rain catchment system. And it's according, if you live in an apartment, you're going to be limited. If you live in a city, you're going to be limited. But rain catchment systems, or having a water source close by that you can filter water or boil water, or put bleach to treat the water. But I would look toward other alternatives for water. It was one of the things in this book. Of course, it was in Los Angeles, but water became extremely expensive. And so, and there were some rain issues as well, but water became extremely expensive, and that put a strain on people's ability to buy other things.
Allison Bradshaw says, hi, question. We recently checked on some regular household batteries we had in our Faraday cage. Many were corroded. The dates were fine. Is it necessary to keep the batteries in the Faraday cage?
The thing is there's a lot of theories, and there's a lot of experts out there that, but really we haven't had a real EMP to affect a large area to know. Some people said, your phones won't be affected, but the towers will be. Some people say your phones are going to die. Cars are going to die. And I think it has a lot to do with, the thing is, it's an electromagnetic charge, so it could affect the battery. But what I would do is I would store lithium-ion batteries in a Faraday bag, in a Faraday cage. Alkaline batteries, they'll corrode over time. They can do things, and it's according to the humidity and what's going on. We store batteries, but we haven't had any problems like that. So not sure if there's some kind of moisture issue or something that's causing them, or there's some kind of contact with metal that's causing them to corrode. But if you want to do away with that, go with lithium-ion CR123s and those type batteries. And to me, that's a better choice, and they last 10 years. I think 5 years on the AA's and the AAA's as far as holding a charge. But lithium-ion batteries are longer.
Keelan asks, question about prepper groups. Do you plan for a uniform or anything so you can identify each other easily within your own group? No,
we don't. That's the one thing about it is there's definitely, in a confrontation type situation, being able to differentiate from others would be a plus. The thing is, if we were in a situation to where it became, we needed to have more of a security force, probably good to have some kind of identification without, but no, we don't. I know one thing. It was funny when the U.S. invaded Panama. We had to go. Well, we went down into Panama because they were having that Noriega and all that problem. And one of the things they did was because they had the same equipment as the Panamanians, and so all the U.S. guys had ghillie suit stuff. They had ghillie straps and webbing on their helmets to differentiate them. So being if it got down to that, whether it was tying a yellow ribbon around your arm or whatever. But yeah, that's something that, really hadn't thought about. I know a lot of times with Antifa, they do some things where they have certain things they do that people know that that's who they are. Wow, it's 1 o'clock. Wow, we blew through that. I'm surprised. Well, guys, thanks for a lot of the great questions. And the thing is, guys, is what's going on right now with the economy, and it's not getting any better. And there's a lot of different, really well-known predictors and people that are in the market that are saying we're not headed for a good direction. And then watching the administration doing what they're doing with just putting more and more strain on the infrastructure, putting strain on with the green energy initiatives that are really hampering our ability to produce fossil fuels. That in itself is a big indication that we're not going in the right direction. But again, a number of other things. And one thing you'll see is don't lose patience if you're prepping and you're doing and you're going, you know what? Ain't nothing happened. Ain't nothing happened in 10 years. No, it takes time. But you can watch the progression. And if you look back 10 years ago at where we are now, it makes it a little bit easier to see. So, yeah, the past 3 years, actually, it's really gone downhill. So, guys, thanks for being here today. And the big thing, guys, the takeaway is make sure that you're doing things to protect you and your family. And that is the whole message here. There are things that are happening. They're out of our control. So do what you can control. And what you do today, if you go out to the grocery store and you buy a can of beans and a can of rice, that puts you that much ahead of where you were yesterday. We also appreciate Exotac. Get a 20% off using Sootch 20 with the link down below in the description. And we want to give a big thanks to Sarah Mack for monitoring and asking the questions. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic.